how you choose to lead your life determines whether your genes coil in or uncoil, and which genes are exposed to expression, which genes are duplicated more frequently or have access to metabolic factors that allows them to manifest themselves.
We're here with Dr. Ali Lankerani, a clinical neuroscientist. He is internationally published and a best-selling author, twice voted as one of America's top doctors. He hosts the TV channel Optimal Beginnings. He has additional training in traditional Chinese medicine and acupuncture, and ran an award-winning private practice helping kids with autism spectrum disorders. Dr. L, as he is affectionately known, currently runs an online course that supports new parents and their children and encourages healthy, growing relationships between them. Nesting amazing kids, how to raise happy and healthy kids, and enjoy the process. Dr. L's mission is to promote brain-based healthcare options to support the safety, health, and education and productivity of new parents and their children to foster their optimum potential and their quest for personal fulfillment. Welcome, Dr. Ali. How are you?
Thank you, Denise. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks to the audience for being here as well.
Well, Dr. Ali, everyone has a story and some part of their life that brought them to where they are and what they're doing today. Now, I've heard your story, and I think it's not only fascinating, but I believe a lot of people can relate to your education and family life. Tell those watching or listening about your growing up years and how that brought you to where you are and how you're helping families today.
All right, well, it's a long story. It starts way back when I was 5 years old, and I was in this country called Iran, where they had a revolution. And when the revolution broke out a year later, the Iran-Iraq War happened, and in the process, basically, it was just a bloodbath. And there was no stability to the society because the regime and the government was changing, and there's all this crazy stuff. You probably remember the Iran hostage crisis that was going on. And these things that were going on, what was happening was making the country really unstable. And as a result, Saddam Hussein ended up taking advantage of the situation and started a war that basically, in order for Iran to protect itself, it needed everybody on the front lines. And unless you were in the top 1% of the country as far as academic performance is concerned, when it came to the national exams, the university entrance exams, you would be shipped off to the front lines. In fact, they were looking for any excuse to send kids as young as 12, 13 years of age into those front lines. And I, unbeknownst to me, because back then the diagnosis did not exist, I had ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which is a learning disability, which doesn't bode well when you're trying to be in that 1% of the country, basically. So my parents took it upon themselves to try to really help me and push me towards performing academically. And in that process, I could see their frustration. I could also see that how much extra effort it took on my part to basically be able to perform at that level compared to other people. And that affected my confidence and all these other things. And also your preferences became something of a lesser priority. You were much more better off if you could put everything, all your interests aside, and purely focus on the academics and what you needed to do to basically survive. Now, the good news and the good story about that is that my parents kind of won the lottery, and we happened to be able to move to the United States when I was about 14 years of age, about 2 weeks before I was to be taken for draft for the war, basically. So we happened to come, and as we came to the United States, my parents basically told me, we've brought you as far as we could, and from here on out, you're on your own. And that's basically where my personal story, my personal struggles truly began. Because, you know, growing up, you have family, you have connections, you have people that you know. Now I was in this foreign country, didn't actually speak the language quite well, and I had to, at the age of 14 or 15 years of age, I had to build an entirely new social structure, learn my way around the school system and the academics, what I needed to do to get into college, and so on and so forth. So when I got into college, because I had put off my personal interests for such a long time, I had a huge problem, which is trying to choose a major, figuring out what it is that I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And basically, that's one of the things that I really want to always tell the parents, that in the process of parenting, making sure that the kids' personalities develop, that they also are allowed to go ahead and manifest their likes and dislikes and figure out who they are, so that when they get to that stage where they are becoming young adults, have to decide for themselves, the foundation is already there and they can build a solid foundation instead of trying things out for the first time and possibly falling behind in the process. And then, of course, the years went on, another 10, 12 years, and I became a clinical neuroscientist. And then I was in clinic trying to help parents which had children that have autism spectrum disorder, things like Asperger's and autism and ADD, ADHD, Tourette's, and dyslexia. So now I not only identified with the kids, but I also identified with the parents and the challenges and the struggles that they were going through, and I was trying to help them out. And then I realized that these kids were coming to me pretty much with the first decade of their life having been spent with this condition. They were coming to me because the academics and the school system was sending them back either because of the academic problems or behavioral issues. And we had to figure out what therapies would work, how the family could be more effective in administering therapies and doing things at home that could actually go ahead and make the unit more cohesive, more functional, and allow the kids to be fully functioning and manifest the whole life, basically. So I decided to move on to the prevention side of things. And first it was, well, maybe we could work on the early years, the toddler years. And then it became the infancy. And then it became the stuff around the birth. And then it became the pregnancy. And then it became, it's like, let's focus on the mother's health, make sure that we get it as early as possible. And that's where I am today, basically. So the sooner the better, of course, but I don't think that comes as a surprise.
No, I'm sure it's not. I think that most parents realize that a lot of things are not caught until later in life. Now, in your experience, about what age generally are you tending to see where parents are coming to you or that they came to you when you were in practice when it was noticed, more so as okay, yeah, we need to find out what's happening and see if we can make some adjustments?
The good news is that nowadays there are a lot more therapists, or physicians are much more aware, and things are getting caught a little bit earlier on because the symptoms change as the brain develops. So what you got to understand is that humans are not viable entities until they're about 2 years of age. Because of our large brains, we cannot clear the birth canal with fully developed brains. So when we are born, our brain, we're the only species basically that we were born, and one of our main organs is not developed basically to allow us to thrive and survive. So that's why those first 2 years, human beings are not viable entities. They can't survive. You see, like on the National Geographic or something, you know, a little calf or some animal gives birth, and then they get up and start chasing their moms around, and they start basically moving around. But for humans, that is not the case because our brain needs to develop, and it develops outside of the womb, basically. So when you said what age, what happens is the symptoms are different depending on what phase of brain development we're in. So early on now, they're catching these developmental delays and these milestones that if you don't hit them at the right time, that could be a sign and symptom. During pregnancy, there are markers that could show that, hey, you know what, maybe we need to be more careful, or maybe we could do things so that the pregnancy could end up being more smooth, or the birthing process could go on better. The nursing early on, the baby's development, those developmental delays, those developmental milestones are important stuff. Now, when I was in clinic, they were coming in around 5 to 7, 8 years of age, basically, and that's when I was seeing them. And also sometimes we were seeing the kids that were older coming in, and the parents were asking me, can you check the younger kids, make sure that they are fine and they're not going to be in the same boat in a few years, basically. So we would basically look at that as well. And this is the important part, because When I was going through school, many of these disorders, the autism spectrum disorders, their rate of occurrence in the population was a lot less. It was 1 in 10,000. But currently, you see that to be 1 in 58. So it's a huge, huge problem that's growing and is affecting society in many different ways. So when the 7, 8-year-olds were coming in, it was their ability to sit still through a class, basically. When you're coming in as adolescents, maybe it was socialization skills and being able to make friends. Earlier on, as toddlers, it was a different story about coordination, being able to be sensitive or irritable, or these different things, or they're picky eaters, all kinds of stuff that could come about. But as you can see, the symptoms develop differently because different parts of the brain are responsible for different tasks. So if a part of a brain is not developing optimally, that specific task is what is going to manifest itself as strange or suboptimal, basically. But our goal is to make sure that we go ahead and improve this. So when I mentioned the odds, basically, now, unless the only people who are having babies happen to be the people that are on that spectrum, on the autism spectrum, you cannot explain this huge increase in the occurrence of autism spectrum just because of genes and genetics, as some people early on used to say. So a lot of times when you talk about it, even be it heart disease and diabetes and things like that, you have to understand that while you may have the genes for heart disease, you may have the genes for diabetes, a lot of times what happens in your lifestyle determines whether those genes get manifested or they don't. So if you have a father and son and they both sit in front of the TV on the couch all day long eating potato chips and they both develop coronary heart disease, is that truly genetics or is that lifestyle related? You know, when the kids are growing up and they see how their parents are, what they behave, how they eat, then that becomes their reality. They mimic and they basically structure their own life designed after what they see in their day-to-day family unit, basically. So as many of us understand and become adults, when we become adults and we get to see other lives, we see how all of a sudden things that we thought were normal in us or in our family is not necessarily always the normal thing.
So what you're saying is that a lot of these conditions that we're thinking are hereditary, it might be more of a yes and no kind of thing, that both hereditary and, you know, genes and environment, let's say, combine together to make this particular, whatever it is, condition manifest itself. And that, so let's say that we can potentially prevent some of these conditions from manifesting in our children. Is that correct?
Yeah, actually, one of the best analogies I ever heard was somebody telling me that in this particular case, the genetics is like the gun, but the environment, the lifestyle is the trigger. So you may have the gun, but unless you pull the trigger, it's not going to do anything. So this is one of those, this is one of those things that your lifestyle is very, very profound. How you choose to lead your life determines whether your genes coil in or uncoil, and which genes are exposed to expression, which genes are duplicated more frequently or have access to metabolic factors that allows them to manifest themselves. So it's just like a muscle, basically, different parts of your genes. So if you exercise a certain part a lot, that part becomes really good at coiling and uncoiling and being manifested, whereas some other part that you never use really gets tight and wound up and resources move away from it. And then it's not that easy to go ahead and access that gene. So you could, I mean, there are even studies on obesity that can show this. So not only can you, within your own life, manifest these genes, you can also pass on these genes, depending on how coiled and how unwound they are, to your offsprings as well. So some of these things can go 1 to 2 generations down, we can see now, that can actually affect you. Now, when you think about that, you think about what your parents did or what your grandparents did, the Great Depression, the World Wars, Vietnam, all of these things. And then you can think about, or a different country where they were, or what they were exposed to. And all of these different things could now end up affecting you, affect your genes. One of the things, for instance, this is a little off topic, and you can stop me at any time you want, but when girls are born, all the eggs, their reproductive system was created in utero. So during the pregnancy, a mom's health, what they're exposed to, what they go through, affects the actual eggs of their daughters that they will have for the rest of their lives. So think about that, and think about what you're passing on, and understand that this lifestyle that you choose to have doesn't affect just you, but affects your offsprings and even your great grandkids and grandkids as well.
It does make you pause and think about what you're doing for your own lifestyle. So how early can parents begin to equip their children's development to have a healthy brain?
So as I always say, the earlier the better. There's plenty of study that shows that the maternal health, the mother's health, determines how a pregnancy, even conception, how the conception happens, how the pregnancy goes, and all these other things. If a mom is fit, I know that one of the things that we encourage pregnant parents, moms do, is make sure that they stay active as late into their pregnancy as possible. There's a lot of misnomer via the marketing and the social media that shows pregnancy or birthing process to be this horrible, painful, traumatic experience, whereas in fact, it's one of those defining moments in a woman's life, and it actually has profound developmental impact on a woman as well. And but you also build up to that level to be able to conceive, to be able to have a child and be pregnant, and ultimately to be able to deliver that child healthily into the world, to be able to nurse that child, and then ultimately the skills that you have picked up along the way to be able to parent that child. So those are all important markers that lead to the development of a child. Of course, having said that, today is always a good day to start. It doesn't matter whether your child is 13 or whether you are thinking about having a baby.
Well, from what I remember, when I was expecting my children, doctors advised taking prenatal vitamins with iron and folic acid. That was pretty much it. So what are the best practices today that expecting mothers can do to help the developing fetus? And should they even begin before conception?
So that's a good question. I usually say the best place to start is learning to work with your body instead of against it. And frankly, the organ that controls the function of everything else in your body is up here, your brain, basically. So whether it's your immune system, whether it happens to be your digestive system, whether it happens to be your musculoskeletal system, whatever, your reproductive system, they're all impacted and influenced by your brain and your nervous system. So if you can learn to work with your brain, I really believe that this is 21st century medicine, that instead of us trying to fight against our body, try to give it some pill or potion or some outside influence to go ahead and coerce it to do what it is we want them to do, to actually go ahead and work with our body so that it can do what it's been designed to do for hundreds of thousands of years, basically, which is to take your genes as it is specific to you and deliver the results that you are asking it to do. So in order for your brain to be able to do that, it needs three things. It needs proper nourishment, it needs proper rest, and it needs proper stimulation. Now, by stimulation, I'm not talking about video games and spending time on your iPhone. Basically talking about movement as it is in real life. So we're talking about pulling, pushing, lifting, carrying, and sustained movement, like walking, running, things that we're designed to do basically in a natural environment. So that is proper stimulation in gravity so that your joints understand where they are in space and send that feedback to your brain. This is a very interesting thing. Human brain is different than most other animals, including primates, in that there is an area of it that is higher evolved than all these other ones, called your insular cortex. And this insular cortex is responsible for empathy. Now, one of the things in autism spectrum disorders that is the hallmark is the ability to connect. Like when you point to something, for that child to be able to know your intention of what you're pointing at, not your fingertip. So if you point at the light switch, they will not look at your fingertip, but they will look at where you're pointing to, which is the light switch, and then be able to understand that or understand your facial gestures. That is a function of your insular cortex, basically. And empathy is a big part of that. So a lot of times when you think about things that make us human, empathy is high up on that list, basically. And that comes from stimulation that comes from the deeper brain centers that get their rhythm and coordination from movement in gravity.
Wow, I had no idea.
So brain develops through your senses and through your motor system, through the spinal cord as it goes into the deeper brain centers. The deeper brain centers then become the metronome that coordinate and strengthen via signals other parts of your brain, your executive functions, your balance. So if you never get these things coordinated, you're not going to have coordination of your thought. You're not going to have coordination of movement. And if you don't have the coordination of thought and movement, you're not going to be able to focus. You're not going to be able to make executive functions, important decision, prioritization, these things basically that is essential when it comes to academic life and our life as adults, basically. A lot of times you need to be able to put off things that are impulsive and be able to make rational decisions. But you can't do that if these areas in your brain are not strong enough to override those deeper centers. And it all starts from movement.
So let me just ask you this then. If a condition such as ADHD or even autism have already come into play, whether the child is 7 years old, 10 years old, 15 years old, or an adult before they're actually diagnosed, is there a way to reduce the effects of some of these conditions and potentially bring the brain into a healthier condition? And or is there ever an age where, well, you got what you got and there's no turning back?
Well, because the brain is developing, the good news is that the brain has the ability to rewire. The thing is that the amount of effort it takes to make it a permanent thing becomes bigger and bigger. So when you catch it early on, you can completely rewire the brain and you will never show any signs of weakness. Later on, as you pass the toddler ages and you get into the childhood ages, what ends up happening is now you're trying to make sure that that area is strengthened as much as possible so that it can sustain, can be durable, it can do the daily activities without crashing. Then when you get into the adolescent life, now it's like, okay, well, we know that these weaknesses exist. What can we do to minimize these, to play into the strengths, to make sure that basically this person can lead as much of a full life as possible? And then as you get into the young adult life, at that point now it's how do we compensate for this condition? What can we do to minimize the effects of the weakness, basically? And then at that point, it's a lifelong understanding that, well, you know what, I should not eat this food, or I should not stay up too late, or I should not be doing these activities, because if I do these things, then I have to pay for it the next day, or whatever the consequences might be, or my mood might change, or whatever it happens to be. So you can always go ahead and support the brain, and you will reap the benefits of it. So that's the good news. Now, how much of a result you're going to get from it depends on how much effort you put into it, how specific you are, and how long you do it. The longer you do it, the better you're going to be, regardless of age.
That sounds great. Yes, I have read from specific individuals, high energy type of executives, where they have ADHD, but they know they have figured out for themselves that if they participate in serious exercise, they go to the gym and really do a hard workout twice a day, that they can focus on what they need to focus on. And they've figured out exactly what their strengths are, and they play to their strengths, and they are able to figure out how to manage their weaknesses, let's say.
Right. And ultimately, we all have our strengths and weaknesses. Our brain is not designed to be completely symmetric. In fact, if it is completely symmetric, there's something not very normal about that. So what we want is areas of strength. That's what gives us our personalities, basically. But you don't want the weak areas to be so weak that they would be crippling, basically. That you would have to compromise your quality of life because of that. So that's our goal, basically. Our goal is not to basically subdue the genius in you, but to empower the genius and make sure that it's not hindered by the weaknesses. That story that you were talking about, my early childhood story, is that I realized that it was difficult for me to read and comprehend the material in the textbooks. So one of the things that I learned to do is make my brain be photographic. So what ended up happening is during the exam, I wouldn't necessarily be able to connect the dots as far as what the content meant, but I could, in my mind, have a picture of the page, where the answer was, what in that page, what the picture and the relevance of it was in that page, and I could verbatim recite what was written on that page, basically, and that's how I basically would do my exams, because you find ways basically to cope with it. But the trouble with it is that imagine if you had to take a 4K super high def picture of everything you ever saw in your life in order to be able to recall it later. It becomes very taxing on your brain system. So then the other parts of my brain had to shut down to make room for the resources and the energy needs that this part of my brain needed. So CEOs are like that too. But in that process, I developed a photographic memory. So it has its goods and it has its bads, basically.
Sounds very taxing. Well, Dr. Ali, you have some support groups that parents can join to get more information on how they can help their kids. Tell us about those, and we'll definitely make sure that everybody has the links as well.
Thank you. Our company is called Role Model Maker, and our goal is to create future role models by being good role models ourselves, basically. It's much easier and better than preaching to the kids what to do and what not to do when they can just look at you and subconsciously basically take in the lessons without you having to teach it to them. So a lot of it has to do with the lifestyle. But we have two support groups. One is called, these are Facebook groups, so it's free to join. Feel free to join them. One is called Food and Fitness 101, where we focus on the aspects of fitness and nutrition and how to incorporate that into your day-to-day life so that you can achieve longevity, health, optimum weight, all the stuff that goes with being healthy and being active. And then we also have another program called Partnership and Parenting 101, where we talk about different aspects of child development and how to develop an optimally healthy child that leads full lives and grows up happy and healthy. That also encompasses parenting skills, partnership skills, and things like that, so that you can bring all of that together, create a functional family unit that you ultimately can also give to the kids as well. We regularly hold meetings at our meetup group called Amazing Parents Network. I'm the creator of the Amazing Parents Network, and we have a branch on the East Coast and a branch on the West Coast. And at least twice a week, we hold regular meetings, and I invite all of you to join us. We have different experts and different interviews and Q&A sessions where we can address specific needs on that. So I invite everybody to be on those spaces.
That is fantastic. Well, Dr. Ali, thank you so much for joining us. And parents, please check out those links that we have down below. You'll definitely want to get involved in these groups. This guy knows what he's talking about. I've been following him for quite some time. Thank you again for joining us, Dr. Ali.
Thank you, Denise. It was nice to be here, and thank you all for listening.